Now, I want to stay on energy now, but let's approach it from a different angle. 2 weeks ago, we reported here that international gas prices spiked after the unions threatened to strike at some of Western Australia's gas platforms. Now, although many people hoped the unions were just bluffing, well, it appears they weren't. Joining me to get the latest on what could be another devastating cost of living hit to households and businesses right across the country is gas and oil market expert Saul Kavonik. Saul, welcome to the program. Now, the Australian Workers Union and the Maritime Union say they've resolved to take industrial action at Woodside's Northwest Shelf gas platforms in Western Australia if they don't get their way in pay negotiations by the start of next month. So tell us, exactly what are the unions asking for here? And what would the ramifications be for Australia and the rest of the world if they do go on strike?
Well, it's quite remarkable, the ramifications we've already seen, where essentially a few hundred Aussie FIFO workers offshore WA in high-vis overalls have caused tens of billions of dollars of gains and losses in European gas markets literally overnight. Now, this comes down to pay. I think they're looking for pay jumps around 20% from what they were on before, noting they actually pay hasn't kept up with inflation over the last few years. But also a lot of it is about conditions and the need for companies to consult with their workforce before making changes to things like rostering, and that's all part of the package. And it comes after the unions already negotiated more lucrative deals, particularly with Impex and Shell last year, and then they're looking to roll that out across all the other facilities. Now, what this means is these three plants that the unions are targeting now account for about 40 million tonnes per annum. That's about half of Australia's LNG supply. It's about 10% of the global market. And that's why it's jolted international markets, because after Russia's gas supply has been withdrawn, the market simply cannot afford to see this kind of level of disruption. And in terms of domestically, the bigger risk here is actually what could happen to domestic supply in Western Australia. These three same plants supply the majority of domestic gas in Western Australia. And if that was to stop, even for a matter of weeks, we'd have a huge energy crisis in Western Australia, and thousands of the very same union jobs in downstream industries would be put at risk. So there's a lot of pressure here on actually both parties to come to an accommodation. I do think we need to, put a little bit of cold water over some of the hysterics we're seeing here, though. This is a normal part of union negotiations. Yes, the unions are serious, they're not bluffing, but typically what we'll see here is initial strikes, which are quite low-level strikes. They have to do it for procedural reasons anyway in order to maintain their vote. And ultimately, I think we will see an accommodation reached here where we will avoid any material supply disruption, which will damage our energy security and the energy security of our allies in Asia and Europe. We get a lot of rhetoric coming out of this, but remember, this isn't an English dinner party. It's a union negotiation. We should expect tough rhetoric, but behind the scenes, I think progress is going to be made and has been made.
I do hope that's right, because Western Australian households are already dealing with a lot on the cost of living front. They don't need a spike there. So the Australian Energy Market Operator will issue its 10-year outlook for the market soon, and industry sources expect it to spell out ongoing reliability risks in the system, including a potential energy crisis this summer. Are you concerned about a crisis this summer? Are blackouts on the horizon now?
Well, absolutely. Look, it sounds like this report is just going to be mentioning what has been quite obvious to most people in the nuts and bolts of our energy market for the last 5 to 10 years. The difference is the crisis, which has always been this thing off in the distance, well, time has passed and now it's on our doorstep. And over the next few years is when these energy security risks really do start to arise. And unfortunately, policy changes we've seen just even in the last 6 months at both the federal and state level are only exacerbating the issue. You've heard me say before, I think the risk of material energy security events, whether that's blackout, brownouts, or having to shut down some of our industry in order to maintain the security of our energy system elsewhere, is becoming acute. It's hard to predict exactly when we're going to see an event, but the likelihood of an event is growing every year over the next few years forwards, and it can be as soon as this summer. Keep in mind, right, that all the redundancy in our energy system has been whittled away over the process of about 10 years, and it doesn't have the redundancy left. And now we're seeing death by 1,000 cuts, a lot of little things across the policy front, investment front, NIMBY front. It's all coming together, and it just makes the risk of one thing or two things falling over and the whole system comes down. Whereas 5 years ago, we'd be resilient to those kind of mishaps where just one coal-fired power generator or one other, part of the system suffers. We don't have that redundancy now. So the next time we have a mishap in one area, it can have a cascading effect. And unfortunately, that's going to potentially hit us at home and hit the most vulnerable people who, for that. Most of us, if the power goes out for a few days, it's an annoyance. But for some people, it's life or death. It's their livelihoods. It's the future families. And unfortunately, that is the kind of risk we are now facing over the next few years.